All down over to here. Benny Goodman going. Oh, jeez. Way behind everybody.
Presenting Benny Goodman and his music.
There we go. Now I'll open my chat window. And we are nearly ready to go. Okay. Hey, Chris. Good evening, everybody. Hey, Sue. Got the other window open just a bit more. Just found a couple more possible Johann Hawk wives to deal with.
An even more torrid band who purveys assorted rhythms, all danceable, in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago.
I may have just solved a mystery,
All,
but I must work.
Hits, Blue Skies.
Hey, Betsy and Jacqueline and Vicky and Sherlock and Kathleen and Dawn. Hey, Jeff and Timothy, Laura, Mary, Marie, Mona, Timothy, Jerry, Denise, Evelyn, John, Bridget, Martin. Hey, Dad. Hey, Heather. Hey, Sue. Hey, Doreen. Hey, Sarah. Hey, Octavio. Where did I put my drink? Oh, there it is. Hey, Mom. Hey, Cindy. Oh, we're all okay so far. Hey, Maureen, welcome back. Been pretty much a straight shot. Went from the microfilm room to home to sort out all of the files, turn them into PDFs. I got about 50 new Johann Hawk articles today. Mostly just filling up my gap. Hey, Becky. Hey, Carol. Yeah, so there's definitely a little clue here. Well, hello, Miles. Thank you, Don. Hey, Emily in Iowa City. Alright, I gotta close some of these windows. I got so many open right now. Genealogy site's looking up these marriage records. Spam folder looking for my password to reset info from Mastodon. Even though we all know that's not going to work out, right, Mastodon? Hey, Donna. Hey, June. Hey, Georgia, Eileen. Hey, Laura. You know, there's a rumor that Al Capone tried to buy this house. And it's an early Capone rumor, too. It was published in the 50s. Which, as these things go, is pretty early. Hey, Paula in West Des Moines. Hey, Carrie. Hey, Lisa. West Des Moines, home of Valley West Mall. Which seemed so much bigger when I was a kid. Hey, Judy. Hey, Steve. Hey, Eileen. Hey, Don. Hey, June. Thank you, Kathy. I enjoyed taking you guys on the train. We'll do that again for sure. Yeah, I'm signing up on every other social thing that comes up. So, well, Twitter's hit the point where it's like, hey, we fired our security team. Give us your credit card. With their new verification scheme, sports Twitter is nothing but fake accounts now. Mostly fake accounts either trying to make money or playing pranks. Oh yeah, I did. I actually have a large payment coming in from an obscure relative. I'll just need you to give me like $1,000 now so I can access it. Hey Cassie, hey Aaron, hey Judy. Hey Jeanette. Hey Eleanor, hey euphoniums. Hey Kathy and Ellen. Now there's anybody new on here, check out the Mysterious Chicago Regulars page if you get a chance. Mysterious Chicago Regulars and Miles Fan Club. This is Miles. Do I know about William Booth being mummified? I know a little bit about it. It wouldn't have been John Wilkes Booth. It would have been one of those guys who claimed to be John Wilkes Booth in hiding. I know a guy who knows a lot more about it. The mummy itself has disappeared. It's still thought to exist, but disappeared. I know a little, but I have to go back through my notes. I know a guy who knows a lot more. The guy who runs the Lincoln Conspirators website. Hey, Grandma Bell. Wait, is it still saying the wrong thing over there? I did change it. I updated it. I told it to update. But now I still be saying after hours. It's not after hours. Sometimes the update doesn't go through when I'm in a hurry. So apologies there. We're doing Prairie Avenue tonight. So I've just been scrambling so much.
Benny Goodman goes way back and gets a lot of rhythm out of Walk, Jenny, Walk.
Welcome along, everybody. Sorry it says after hours down below. I will try to get that to change. See if it'll let me. See if I can do it without losing you all. Now it should have gone through. Probably too late. I probably made a darn fool out of myself. But I'm pretty good at that. Now everything is all out of whack. Lost John sitting on the railroad track. Hey Marie. Hey everybody. Thanks to anybody donating to Warnock in Grandma Bell's honor. She got a shout out from Warnock. It was posted on his Instagram and his Twitter and his Facebook. Prairie Avenue after hours we could just about do. Plenty of scandal on Prairie Avenue, and pretty much all of it involves sex. Of course. Evening, Laura Lee. Heather, enjoy the title track, Outdoor Pool, and Villain off of her album. First three I would recommend. Oh, and Kate's Brother, the single. People my age are sleeping on Maisie Peters, but I think she is going to be huge. She's got all the tools. Loved her songwriting, that saw her in concert. She put out an A+ high-energy rock show.
And they all loved it. They all loved those passions when they played by Benny Goodman. And now another one just in the same vein, Rosetta.
We're going to let Benny Goodman do one more tune here because I'm still getting kind of frazzled. Octavio, yeah, he had truly had a dynamite speech. I've never forgiven him for not supporting the Star Wars Museum, honestly. But he's definitely got the best buttons in the business with like a mustache and everything. It's like a bat signal, but instead of a Batman, it's a mustache. So, yeah, that's promising. Hey, Ryan on YouTube. Hey, Kathleen and Timothy. Hey, Kevin and Tara. All right, sometimes I worry that people are going to get mad when we get kind of political on here, and then I'll have to deal with them. But come on, nobody's actually going to admit to supporting Herschel Walker out loud, are they? Yeah, I'm actually dressed down today. I'm just wearing my regular old thermal under this jacket. All right, we're going to let Benny wind on down because I really do have to get started up here. So, all right, everybody, despite what you may have seen, we are actually doing Prairie Avenue, Splendor, and Scandal today. Welcome along. The titles didn't always update. Sometimes it happens. I've been very working on this this Johann Hawk book, sorting through things and organizing and cataloging about 1,000 files and then finding more files. There's always more of this. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome along to Mysterious Chicago. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian for going on 20 years here in Chicago. Author of several books, including Mysterious Chicago, the book, Flickering Empire, How Chicago won the invented the U.S. film industry, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, Murder Maps USA, and the brand new Graceland Cemetery, Chicago Stories, Secrets, and Scandals, which are where several of the people we'll be talking about tonight ended up. Today, this is one tour that we also do in person, but it's always kind of a trick because it's really hard to find parking for enough people to run a tour in this space. But this is Prairie Avenue. You see, you got your loop right here. Then down below is, just below the South Loop, is the Prairie Avenue Millionaires District. Or it used to be the Millionaires District. Not saying that millionaires don't still live there. It's still a rather fancy area to this day. Most of the old robber baron mansions are no longer extant, but some of them are, and the stories are still there whether the buildings are or not. Let's go ahead and get started here. We're going to start around the bend. Just over around the bend from Prairie Avenue within the district is Fort Dearborn Park. Battle of Fort Dearborn Park. Now this goes back to the very earliest days of Chicago, before it was Chicago, before there was a town here at all. There was just a military fort and some various Potawatomi settlements. War of 1812 came around. The order came in to evacuate Fort Dearborn, the only major settlement here at the time. Captain Hull Captain Nathan Held went out and had a council with the Potawatomi and said, listen, we need to evacuate this place. If you'll help us, we'll give you all of our guns, all of our ammo, and all of our whiskey. But in the grand tradition, they did not keep this promise. They threw all of the whiskey into the river, threw all the guns and ammo down a nearby well. And anyway, apparently the Potawatomi appear to have been working for the British anyway. They started evacuating. We got down to about this point, at which point the battle broke out. Suffice it to say, it was a fairly short battle. A number of the settlers were killed, others were sold as slaves to the British, who to their credit promptly let them go. But by most accounts, that all happened right about where we're standing right now. It's kind of difficult to ascertain. There are other people who say it was about 10 blocks north of this, or 5 blocks north of this, or a little bit west of this. And, you know, it's a battle. It doesn't take place in 10 square feet. But this is how Chicago looked at the time. There's just a couple of houses over here. Now, I want to just move this thing up a little bit and just point something out. There's this canoe over on the left. One of the guys that we'll be talking about pretty soon claimed that he's the guy in the canoe in this painting. He doesn't look like him to me, but it's going to come up again. We will stroll around from here. Now we're moving our way down to where Prairie Avenue actually is. There actually are accounts that the water still tasted like whiskey for a little while after all of that. So this is the 1700 block of Prairie Avenue, which includes the home of Catherine Dexter McCormick. Here she is in her lab coat studying at MIT, one of the first women to graduate from MIT, and used to spend her childhood in this neighborhood searching for relics of the Battle of Fort Dearborn. There was one major one standing down here, right here on the corner, was what they called the Massacre Tree. In those days, they called it the Fort Dearborn Massacre. Now, this was an old dead tree that's apparently still had bullet holes in it. It was identified by Fernando Jones, the guy who claims he was the guy in the canoe in that painting, and had all kinds of stories, really. We'll more on him later. But this was a tree that they kept until it was hit by lightning, right outside the home of Mr. George Pullman. So the corner where we're standing in the video, is where we would be right here. This was the home of robber baron George Pullman, who ran the Pullman Palace Car Company and built an entire town for his employees, designed by the architect Solon Beeman, who also did the house that used to stand right here with these great mansard roofs. I really do enjoy that house, to be honest. Now, right around the time of Pullman's death, a guy came knocking at the door saying, "I am your son." Now, Pullman said, "No, you're a crazy person," and had him thrown out. But a couple of weeks, shortly thereafter, when he died, this guy attended the funeral from across the street and faded away from the news. He claimed that his mother had told him on her deathbed that he was Pullman's son, and said he didn't want money. "I just want him to love me." Yeah, good luck with that. Getting George Pullman to love you. These are his sons who lived in the house with him, George Jr. and Walter Sanger Pullman, who were always in trouble, lots of scandals, got kicked out of one school after another, widely despised for being total snobs. Sanger died in a riding accident in 1905. George, by then, was already dead of pneumonia. Each of them were only left $3,000 a year in Pullman's will, which was, compared to the kind of lifestyles they had been living, absolutely trifling and pretty close to just cutting them off altogether. George Jr.'s fiance dumped him immediately. And he broke off, and somebody got engaged to a woman named Blanche Barrett, then married Sanger's old fiance Lynn instead, but kept on having an affair with Blanche. They had previously attended the Harvard School, where Leopold and Loeb would later go. Now, it is said one night's carousal cost the old man Pullman $18,000, and all this damage was done in one saloon. This rich man's son is only one example of the useless lives of young men raised in luxury. Once again, that's like 6 years of annuity that he was getting paid off. And here's how he looked. Really a sickly young man, isn't he? Enough ripping on Mr. Pullman. I mean, we can never get enough ripping on Mr. Pullman, but let's take a look across the street here at the Kimball House. This is one of my favorites. It's what they call the French Chateau style, also designed by Solon Beeman. This was the home of Mr. and Mrs. Kimball of Kimball Pianos. Now, Mr. Kimball knew nothing about pianos initially, but he was a merchant. A bankrupt client paid him with 4 pianos instead of cash. He turned around and sold those 4 pianos for more cash than he would have gotten in the first place, and decided, hey, I'm in the wrong business. His wife, Ava Campbell, got into collecting art. She was into old masters, and she was always talking about how she wanted to complete her collection of old masters, which meant to her one of each master. Probably her best-known purchase was for about $100,000. She bought this Rembrandt. This is $100,000 back when that was a couple of million. But there's no way anybody is buying Old Man with a Chain by Rembrandt for a couple of $1 million anymore. I think it's a good 50 times that at least. Now, towards the end of her life, she kind of lost her mind and was just living in this magnificent museum without even really knowing where she was or what these paintings were. People had to watch her very carefully. We're also going to move over just a little bit and see a 1940s addition to it, which is a coach house. Another house out back. This one is currently the offices of the United States Soccer Federation. Some are museums, some are still houses, though. But in the back, I've always thought the coach house was kind of meant to evoke the look of piano keys, just like the slabs on their grave at Graceland. That's the kind of thing people just don't write down, though. For a long time, this was the offices of the Architecture Center, or one of the architecture foundations in Chicago. They spread around a rumor in the 1950s that Al Capone had tried to buy the place, which, as Capone rumors go, it's actually at least a fairly early one. We're going to spin around from here. And check out the Glessner House, which attracted a lot of notice at the time just because architecturally it was just so different. Though supposedly Pullman said, "Who did I ever tick off that I have to look at that thing across the street all the time?" But this was made for farm equipment baron John Glessner and his wife, noted diarist Frances Glessner. We know a lot of the things we know about these people we know because Frances was such a voluminous diary keeper. This was built for them by the architect Henry Hobson Richardson in his style Richardsonian Romanesque. Here he is, this like Falstaff-looking guy. He also liked to pose in medieval robes. 19th century architects were a very odd bunch, but he thought this like tied him back to the old medieval architects of the olden days. Also you can see the same motifs here in the Potter tomb at Graceland Cemetery. Now, even at the time, it got a lot of notice, and not everybody loved it. Like here, he's moved into a queer-looking mansion, which the great Richardson designed at the corner of 18th and Prairie, which has been taken by the untutored for a stable, a factory, and a bowling alley. One could bowl. Now, this is a photograph by George Glessner. These were some, the children of these particular rich people did not live the useless lives. George was a noted photographer, and Frances, his sister, got involved in what was called nutshell studies, early forensics. What she did was recreated murder scenes in what appeared to be dollhouses, recreated them down to the very last detail, which ended up helping aspiring detectives learn how to put together crime scenes, learn what to look for in crime scenes. She made dozens and dozens of these nutshell studies, a couple of which are even still used. Let's move on across the street here. This is the Coleman Ames house by Henry Ives Cobb of Ives and Cobb. Coleman Ames was a hardware guy, only lived there for a couple of years before he died. Then Minor Ames, a coal merchant, got it and lived there for 2 years before he died. You kind of get the impression this house is cursed, and that's not necessarily cured by Joseph and Mrs. Fish moving in. Mrs. Joseph Fish. I'm not even sure they're so weird about giving women's first names back in those days. But Mr. Fish was an insurance guy. Mrs. Fish was involved in a lot of Jewish organizations, which made them kind of an object of fascination in the neighborhood. Arthur Meeker Jr. said they were really fascinated first because they had monkeys, and also because they were Jewish. And he used to wonder, were the monkeys Jewish too? There's a joke about it was only if the monkeys' mothers were Jewish. But having made his fortune in insurance, all of a sudden, Joseph was accused of being a head of an arson ring. Fanny Korshak was arrested for arson, and her husband, David the Torch Korshak, an uncle of Sidney, who was later a big fixer for the mob, said that the real criminal here was Joseph. He was the one telling them which building should be torched and making sure that the payments went through. Now, this became quite a trial, too, and the prosecuting attorney was just brutal on Joseph, saying, "I thank God not all men are such miserable scoundrels." But after a big trial, he was eventually acquitted. One of the jurors said we couldn't make heads or tails of the evidence, so we had to rely on the character of witnesses. The prosecution's witnesses were all crooks. The defense had all kinds of high-ranking character witnesses. So he's off the hook for that one. But man, they really tried to drag that guy through the mud. Let's just move just down a little bit here. What we call the Resmar Mansions. Newer townhouses. But this is what used to be there. And that first building you see, if I line these up right, You can still see that the one on the left, the Coleman Ames house, was still there. But here's what they've replaced it with. That first one you come to was originally the house of Joseph Sears. This is originally built by the Burnham Company. It was remodeled from looking like this. There's Mr. Burnham and me in a mural by Candace Johnson. So this eventually became the home, after Joseph Sears, the founder of Kenilworth, this became the home of the Meeker family. This is Grace Murray Meeker, who grew up on the Prairie Avenue area, was still telling stories about the parties there for the rest of her life. By the 1940s, she was like a link to this bygone era. And that is her with her son, Arthur Meeker Jr., who provides us with a lot of the anecdotes about people here. He grew up at the tail end of the Gilded Age and ended up with a kind of a detached view of the whole thing. I mean, all of this like robber baron mansions and stuff, that was just the stuff that his parents were into. He would go around saying things like, you know, in the late 19th century, it must be admitted that taste was at an absolute low point. All these liver-colored mansions. Meeker ended up becoming a travel writer, also wrote a novel called Prairie Avenue that covered quite a lot of this stuff. And just down the block over here was another cool house that is now long gone. Let's swing around. I am drinking some cranberry gin and ginger ale. Over here we have what is now a park. But there used to be a number of different houses right up here. For one thing, just to the right there would have been the home of Osborne Keith of the Keith brothers. We'll be seeing more of the Keith brothers later. His house was built by Henry Ives Cobb. But this is the Clark House from 1836. This is generally considered the oldest house that is still standing in Chicago. There is one from 1835 in Norwood Park, but that wasn't Chicago at the time. Henry died in the cholera epidemic of 1849, and initially he was just buried on the property. He thought it was hearing all these horror stories about the cholera victims just being misplaced or just piled into pits up in the old city cemetery, so he just told everybody with his last breath, like, just bury me here. And he remained buried there for a long time, up until about the 1860s when he was moved to Graceland. Now, the grave wouldn't have been right here. The place was actually a couple of blocks north of here. But then after the Great Chicago Fire, they moved the house down to the south side, which they thought would be safer. It wasn't until 1977 that they packed the whole thing up and moved it to where it is now. There's an interesting diagrams of how they had to do this, what all the things they had to do to get it over the L tracks. We'll proceed down just a little bit here. Now, what we see down at the edge here would be places that, there used to be a couple of mansions still standing here. Would have looked about like this. Or a bird's eye view looks like this. We'd have to move down a little bit to get it just like this. But right here at the edge was the home of Fernando Jones. Here's Fernando Jones. Fernando Jones is one of those guys you don't know exactly which story to tell about him. He used to tell all these stories about how he killed him a wolf when he was only 15, right where the old the Title and Trust building would later stand on Dearborn Street. He came to Chicago with a boatload of hardware when he was only 15. Wife Jane was very big on suffrage. Now, towards the end of his life, when he got to be 90 years old and was telling a lot of stories, one of the last links to old Chicago by then, he just had a lot of stories that mostly were probably old man stories. Like, everybody was familiar of the story about Fernando Jones and the wolf because he never stopped talking about it. Lots and lots of stories from this guy. For instance, he says he's the guy in the canoe in this painting. Also had lots of stories about how he taught the Native Americans not to be afraid of Halley's Comet back in the old days. David Kennison, the guy who claimed to be the last surviving participant of the Boston Tea Party, was a friend of his. He was the one who gave him the vial of tea leaves that he said were from Boston that are still in the collection of the Historical Society. Fernando Jones definitely seems like the kind never to let facts get in the way of a good story. But he did have some good stories, and in his house, there's also a connection to Wilbur F. Story. Wilbur F. Story was the editor of the Chicago Times who tried to build himself his own house. I'll just very brief samples of his horrible horribly racist shit. But at one point, he tried to build himself a castle. Well, the castle wasn't ready yet, so Fernando Jones was going overseas, so he rented Fernando's house. Stunk the place up, or he claimed that it was already bad smelling when he got there. But then when Fernando Jones got back, Wilbur F. Story wouldn't leave. And eventually he did my favorite thing that Wilbur F. Story ever did is right about on this spot, Wilbur F. Story died. Probably the best thing he ever did. We'll just move down from there a little. The dance gif isn't coming up. But you all know I promised Rosehill I'd stop dancing on his grave. I lied. I don't know how exactly he stunk up the place, but the voices in his head wrote dictated letters to him where they said it was Fernando Jones who smelled so bad. I'm guessing it was Will. But this, one of the ones still standing, one of my absolute favorites. I just can't get enough of this one. This is the Elbridge Keith House, voted by his high school as the man who looked most like a mouse. Would have been his brother would have been Osborne Keith, who had the house down on the end. And his other brother, Edson Keith, used to have a house that was right next door to this one. Here's an older photograph of it. Now, the Keith brothers ran a fur and hat company. Here's an advertisement where they advertised looking for a maid, Jewish preferred. Now, Edson Keith, his brother who lived next door, eventually one day walked across the street and into the lake, and the last that was ever seen, his coat lying on the ground was all they could find the next day. Fernando Jones was on the coroner's journey when his body washed ashore in 1896. This led to quite of a scandal. It was trying to figure out, well, was he sick? Was he running out of money? It just couldn't occur to people that, mental health doesn't care how rich you are. Take a quick spin from here. Now, right here, this was said to be a piece of an old church that they put up as a decoration. It got wrecked by a car fairly recently. They didn't, if it was in fact from a church, they never specified which one. But right back in where these townhouses were now was originally the home of Marshall Fields Sr. There's a nice older picture of it. And a portrait of Marshall himself. And his wife, Nanny, and their 2 kids. Now, Marshall was generally known as a very dull human being. It was also in this house that while he was married to Nanny, he was also carrying on an affair with Delia, the woman who lived behind them, with her husband, Arthur Caton. And people, Grace Murray Meeker always told Arthur, of course we knew about that. Nobody said a thing. We didn't think a thing about it. I think the most surprising thing was just that Marshall Field had found 2 women who liked him. They did, however, throw one really big party here for their kids. It was known as the Mikado Ball. This was Gilbert and Sullivan's The Mikado. Their Japanese operetta was the big thing at the time, so they spent an unbelievable amount of sum on this thing. It was reported occasionally to cost $75,000. This was a guy whose employees made about $100 a year in many cases. So this is about a lot of money was spent on photography, but strangely only one photograph is known to survive. And this is a picture of Alice Keith is over on the left, the daughter of one of the Keiths. This is Delia. Now, one thing I also found when looking this place up, the kind of parties we had in Chicago back in the day, we also did this thing called the paper fox chase, where everybody would ride around on hobby horses. So I love the caption at the bottom, the way they do it in Chicago. Yes, that is in fact how we do it in Chicago. But just next door to Marshall Field Sr., this was the mansion of Marshall Field Jr., which is still standing. Another Soul and Beeman joint. Now, the opening tomb that we've been coming to on the new route at Graceland with the new gate is the Huck Vault, shown here sideways. One of the daughters of Mr. Huck was Albertine Huck, who married Marshall Field Jr. And this is Marshall Field Jr. himself. But of course, the most famous story about this place is one day the butler walked into a drawing room, as butlers do, and there was Marshall Field Jr. bleeding from a gunshot wound. The official story was that Marshall Field Jr. had accidentally shot himself with a pistol that he was planning to take on a hunting trip in Wisconsin. Other people suspected it was a suicide, and others said that perhaps he had just been at the Everleigh Club, which was in fact pretty close by. Here's a time lapse of going from point A to point B. Now, the Everleigh Club was the fanciest brothel in town. We just went there virtually last week on the After Hours tour, which this is not. This is Prairie Avenue. The title thing didn't update. Sometimes it happens. We're just walking a couple of blocks down here. Under the tracks, down the block. Wait for the light. And right here, that's all the farther you had to go to get to the Everleigh Club, which of all of the houses of ill repute in town was the one with the best reputation. Also, right in front of it, I found some underpants. So it wouldn't have been that far of a walk. The story was that he just went there for lunch, got into a fight with a bouncer and was shot. They brought him back to his home, partly to spare him the embarrassment of having been shot at the Everleigh Club, and partly to spare the Everleigh Club the embarrassment of being known as a place where people might get shot. So, most newspapers didn't really comment on the legends. Marshall Field had made it known that he would pull his advertising, and he was a heavy advertiser in any paper that said anything untoward. But the Chicago Evening American already didn't get his advertising and figured they could kind of say what they wanted to. In this case, they talked about this was an automatic one. You couldn't accidentally fire this thing. And the butler said something like, well, perhaps he didn't know you couldn't accidentally shoot it, so he did. Doesn't really work. So Marshall himself died just a couple of months after this. And people started referring to Marshall III as the most interesting boy in the world. He was about 11. His other son, Henry, was 10 at the time. Now, eventually they were both going to be inheriting a huge fortune, but they were taken to London by their mother after this. Now, when he was just barely an adult, Henry Field, the one we never really hear about, managed to knock up a chorus girl named Peggy Marsh. He moved back to Chicago, told Peggy, don't worry, I'm going to send for you, then married somebody else. So she showed up on the day of his wedding in 1917, and he died just like weeks later after getting an infection after getting his tonsils removed before going into World War I. She had been promised something like $100,000 to keep her mouth shut. Support for baby Henry Marshfield stopped the minute the guy died, though. So Peggy took up with a guy who turned out to be a German spy, went to court with Marshall III, eventually got a settlement, and then just kind of vanished into history. But here's Marshall III did go into World War I, and after that he started buying up newspapers after a period of living like the Great Gatsby, as you do. Now these three houses on Cullerton, just off Prairie Avenue, always just fascinate me. 213 was the Charles Purdy House. In the 1940s, it was the home of Fred Morelli, the first ward alderman, shown here outside of the old Colosimo's restaurant. In the 1940s, he took over for Hinky Dink Kenna as the first ward alderman. He owned the Chicago Coliseum and ran the jukebox racket with Greasy Thumb Guzik. Century Music Co. was right next to Colosimo's. Now, this is a little bit of a Mike Royko column about Fred Morelli. The new fourth-ward political boss will be Fred Morelli, who was a protege of the big vice operator and later got into the jukebox business. The first ward was his juke territory. You didn't have to get a jukebox from Morelli if you didn't want to. Not at all. You could provide your customers canary music instead. The jukebox racket got to be a thing. It wasn't just selling people the jukeboxes, it was arranging who had a record in a jukebox. That was good advertising for people. That was a big money maker. So there were a lot of bribes going around, and occasionally people would even get killed in the jukebox racket. Now, next, 2 doors down, I couldn't find too much other than, like, in the middle house, there was a guy who was arrested for contributing to the delinquency of a minor, which could mean about anything. But at 217, the red one in the middle there, that I could be pointing at right here, was the home of several different things at the time, at various times. But around 1905, it was the home of J.J. and May Gibson, who were the official photographers of the World's Fair of 1893. They did what were effectively like ID badges for people, but also made like official photos of people from the street in Cairo, official photos of the belly dancers. Now later, after the death of her husband, she got involved in this really wild love triangle, as you do. She was seeing a guy for business, and the guy's wife tried to sue May, saying it was alienation. She has driven my husband apart from me. They got divorced. She won $3,500, and May said, "No, it's just business. That's the only thing I see him as. It's just business." But then a couple of months later, she sued him for breach of promise, saying, "No, he tore up the promissory notes. He promised to marry me, and then he didn't." Bizarre love triangle. But later on, by then she was living over at Calumet in Michigan. But later in life, she founded the Association of 93ers, which was a reunion group for former fair employees. So they could still talk about how grand the fair was, decades and decades after the fact. Also, this place was occupied for a while by Pullman's daughter after she married Frank Loudon, future governor. There's a significant for the Association of 93ers. Eventually, as the number of employees dwindled down, I believe they opened up membership to just people who had been at the fair. You got to do what you got to do. We'll zip around the corner from here. Yeah, I knew I was going to speed up. What's going on here in the comments? I feel like I'm missing some stuff here. Yeah, this is a group of people who like Chicago. If you want to come here and talk about Darren Bailey, get your ass out. Unless you want to talk about how Darren Bailey looks like the principal of a segregated high school. Is Kelly the same one who said that she wanted Herschel Walker to win? Get out of here. I can't find a comment to just kick her. But if you think this is one of those Chicago sites where they just post stuff from the police scanner feed so you can talk about how black people are just randomly violent or something, this ain't for you. But all right, everybody will just all settle down here. So, all right, what we've got here is the William Henry Reed House. William Henry Reed was a businessman who may have been the single most boring person who ever lived. He wrote a whole autobiography and didn't come up with one interesting thing to say other than the fact that he was named after William Henry Harrison on the day that he was nominated for president. That was the guy who was president for about a month and then died, which is probably more exciting presidency than William Henry Reed had as an entire life. His book is mostly just a list of what went on in the news, not how it affected him. It's just like we didn't start the fire without the catchy chorus. Started a drug company. The second half of the book is all just his bank records. It's real. He believed in the virtues of patience, prudence, perseverance, persistence, and I would say plotting. Mostly plotting. We'll move just over next door here to the Rees House. Harriet Rees House by Henry Ives Cobb. This was the home of Catherine Keith after she grew up. She was one of the Keith daughters, married Mr. David Adler, the architect, who designed things like the Attic Club at the Field Building and the Ryerson Mansion that we saw this morning on the morning mini tour. This is a picture of how it looked on the inside. They turned it into a restaurant back in the mid-20th century. The two of these guys, Catherine and David lived here until Catherine was killed in an auto wreck in France, just months after her second novel came out. Now, this one made the news quite a bit a few years ago because they moved the entire house. It used to be a couple of blocks down from here. And just fairly recently moved it over to here. A little bit further beyond it, to the right, now gone, would have been the home of Mrs. H.O. Stone. We talked about H.O. Stone quite a bit. H.O. Stone is the guy who built this for his second wife, Frances Pierce. He was about 40, she was about 16. After her death, he had this statue made for her that was originally at the Old City Cemetery and is now at Rose Hill Cemetery. He then went back to upstate New York, found another woman to marry. That would have been Mrs. Stone. Well, this is her much later. Let's just say he got older, but his bride stayed the same age. Now, Arthur Meeker Jr. remembered her a little bit and would say that she was probably the most prim, proper, bland old woman ever. She believed in perfect harmony, would not abide by an unpleasant word. Seldom was heard a discouraging word, not unlike our comment section most nights. She did once host a party for Oscar Wilde, though. And Marshall Field was at the party, too. So you've got two people who were famously dull and one man who was famously flamboyant. The main thing that survives about the party is that Oscar gave a little talk about what words are different in America and England. Possibly the most bland possible story, the most bland possible business plan you could have. And to finish up, we're just going to go down the block a little bit further, through the area where the Wintrust Arena now stands, the basketball arena, which gives remarkably good acoustics for concerts. Now, generally, they did not go below 22nd Street if you lived here, if you were part of the sifted few, as Grace Murray Meeker called them. But just above here, we would have passed the house of Philip Armour. We would have housed the Getty Mansion was right around here, too, featuring Alice Getty from the Getty Mausoleum up in Graceland Cemetery. And we're going way further down Prairie Avenue. We'd get to the 7200 block where Al Capone's house was, for real. But just over on the corner, there were a couple of things over here. One is this was the site of a very early Chicago cemetery. One of the early ones that they opened up before the Old City Cemetery. But then by the time that most people, that became the Millionaire District, that had become a skating pond for the kids where the cemetery used to be, probably skating over dead bodies. Not to mention they were always still finding relics from the old Battle of Fort Dearborn. But right over here was this house that looked kind of like the Argo Tea building over by the Nederlander Theater. But this was a photography studio for Mr. Steffens, who took this photograph of Bertha Palmer. He photographed just about everybody in the neighborhood. The one reason the sifted few would go below 22nd Street for a time was to go check out, to go get their portrait taken by Mr. Steffens. This is one of his pictures that I just adore. Look at this. No one knows who this is. But the look that he managed to capture on her face is just... Especially back in those days when you had to stare at the camera for so long, this must have been tricky. There's also, this is a portrait he took of Marshall Field that is probably the last photograph ever taken of him. And all right, I see I have gotten to, I'm going to linger on that picture a bit. I used it as an alternate cover for one of my new singles. But now it is time that I get back to my business of trying to sort out fact from fiction with Johann Hawk. I really want to confirm one more wife so I can get up to an even 20. And I've been so wrapped up in that I haven't even decided what to do next week for the tour. So the next upcoming virtual tour is... Let me get back to you on that. But of course, we've got tomorrow morning, we have got Find a Grave Friday. In person, we've got Graceland Cemetery coming up at 2 p.m. Remember, we're using the alternate gate a little bit further north. That'll be the true crime edition of the Graceland Cemetery tour, and after which many of us are going to caravan down to Chicago Avenue and see Sick Fisher's art show. So we've always got stuff coming up. We never stop doing stuff. I'm just falling a little bit behind this week. Though incidentally, tomorrow on the Patreon, I'm going to be showing a really cool thing. I'm going to be showing like all 8 editions of One Day of Johann Hawk newspapers. One Day of Johann Hawk in the Chicago Evening American. You know, they would put out a different, every time there was a tiny bit of news, it'd be extra, extra, new edition, new edition. They did about 10 in one day when Hawk was getting reprieve from being hanged. And it's really cool to just see the succession of all of the pictures all in a row. Over the course of the next few months on the H.H. Holmes and Johann Hawk and Company tier, we'll just be able to follow along almost in real time while I work on this book. I think it's going to be pretty cool, personally. Now, should you need a Mysterious Chicago sweatshirt, hoodie, etc., cafepress.com/MysteriousChicago is the place where you got what you need. Katie, can you imagine Johann Hawk on Tinder? Well, who's going to swipe right on the guy? Or is swipe left the good one or swipe right? I really don't know. But all right, ladies and gentlemen, with that, I will put the Benny Goodman back on. I'm trying to decompress myself here. Decompress. Here's the Benny. Well, I don't know, these jazz rhythms might inspire me to go insane, as they tended to do. Here's what I need. Cats.
Music by Benny Goodman is being presented from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. And now Benny Goodman's arrangement of The Bugle Call Rang.
We all need Miles. Miles, you need to get brushed. You gotta brush you soon. I hate being a dick on trolls, but this is our site. I don't put up with a lot of. I feel it is important to curate this site to keep the discourse the way I want it on here. I didn't see too many of her comments, just that she wanted Herschel Walker to win. We've all held our nose and voted for a candidate occasionally, but you gotta have your limits, jeez. You certainly should not brag that you want such a man to win. Look at Miles. Miles has hopped up to see me here. I'll keep the picture off of his butt. I got some great, like a whole series of action shots of a coyote taking a dump today. Like, how about me? Do I get into bebop? Yeah, I'm more apt to listen to, like, hard bop and bebop than I am to big band most of the time. Other than Duke. Here's Miles. Yeah. Hey, buddy. Purring, this guy. Hey, Gary, happy Veterans Day. Thanks for your service. I think you can probably hear Miles purring if I turn the Benny down a second. if you guys can hear that. Ah, Eric Dolphy. Yeah. Bass clarinet doubling with an upright bass. Yeah. Ah.
And that would put rhythm in the feet of a wooden Indian. That was the bugle call rag, Benny Goodman's own arrangement. Now, the popular tune, Thanks a Million.
Okay, so she called it Chicago. Okay, yeah, get the hell out of here. Why would you come on my tours if you call it... Why would you say that you like my tours if you call it Chicago? Where the hell does she live? Tinkle Dribble, Arkansas? Tampon, Nebraska? Rectal, Arkansas? Miles is still up with the purring here. Best Miles Davis album. Oh, man. For driving, it's a tribute to Jack Johnson. But I'm a fan of the Steamin' Workin' series as well. Kelly, if you think it's Chicago, get the hell out. This is a group for people who like Chicago. There are plenty of groups where people want to talk about how Chicago's a hellhole. Miles. Guys, look at this. Oh yeah, Karen, I'm just picking random state names there. Got some good friends in Arkansas, some good friends in Nebraska too. Last name Peterson, Hawk, or Pullman. That's fair. There actually is a Peterson whose connection I'm trying to figure out exactly to Johann Hawk. Like many people in this story, she has about 3 different last names, at least one of which is spelled 5 different ways. Well, he appears to have had something of an affair with her. He never married her. She got tipped off. BFE, Nebraska? Where's that? Carol, yeah, Ronnie's working on a new book. She's in the later stages of it. Now, Arlie, we used to say bumblefuck instead of bumfuck. I think there is a town called that in, like, Wales or something. And Omaha I haven't been to in a really long time, but I remember the Omaha Family Entertainment Center was pretty awesome. One hell of a skee ball setup. Very entertaining. All right.
Benny Goodman
Whoa, what's the Go-Go Bar?
on the Alamo.
Where's the Go-Go Saloon, Michael? There's Miles still just hanging out. Isn't that what you're doing, Miles? Hey, see you on Saturday, Jan. Thanks, Adrian. This is Benny Goodman coming to us live from the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. Sorry, guys, I gotta... Miles. Now, the Disco Salad Bar, by all accounts, was a happening disco. Down there by the Holmes Castle. Oh, my desk is such a mess, I can't show you guys my desk. There's a Beaver City. Adrian, this streams off of archive.org. And I've got a few other Benny shows from the Congress saved that aren't on here. This is our usual one. January of 36. Kristen, sorry to hear that. See you tomorrow for Find a Grave Friday. A messy desk is a sign of a guy who's working on a book. And doesn't know where to put his mail. Good night, Gary. Thanks again for your service.
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and we stay right in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago and dance some more to Benny Goodman and his orchestra and hear Helen Ward sing Eeny, meeny, miny,
Little
mo.
Chicago, Texas. Probably have a little Texas, Illinois someplace. Arlie, I have no plans to do any more fiction right now. There's one I've been tinkering with a little bit, but I don't know what to do with it. Maybe I'll write it, maybe I won't. Probably I won't. Miles doesn't usually purr that loudly when he comes up here, but he's in a good mood tonight, I guess. And congrats, promotion, that's awesome. A sequel to Sparks. Yeah, a book that I think sold into dozens. I have an idea for how a sequel to it would go, but I just don't think there's a lot of call for that. I think when they sent me the first statement, it had sold like 36 copies. After it won some awards, it won a few more, but it never earned back its tiny advance. Which is a shame. I did like that one. For a long time, it was known as Debbie Does Detention. I was just calling it my top secret project for a few years. It's like it was one of them that it was almost more fun not putting out. Yeah, after it won a Stonewall honor, Poor Libraries picked it up. It also made the YALSA popular paperbacks list. Though it was in fact so unpopular that the publisher tried to get out of paying me the bonus I was supposed to get for that. Or tried to get me to accept just 30% of the bonus instead. I've been hearing Priya howling. She's trying to con us into giving her more treats tonight, I think. As she often does. She got her squeezy go-gurts already. Okay, well, this will probably come as no surprise to nobody who's been watching, but I need to just collapse at this point. I'm a little bit on the frazzled side. So, one more quick plug. Possibly the last walking tour of the year is going to be at Graceland on Saturday afternoon, after which we'll caravan out and celebrate in style, Sick Fisher-wise, on another successful year of Mysterious Chicago tours. Thanks, you have all made it a successful year, another successful year. I figure we're up to like 1,000 broadcasts by now. Wow. And you guys have stuck with me this whole time. That's just absolutely fantastic. I am grateful to each and every one of you. So thanks a lot for joining me again, everybody. I'll find somebody really cool to go find for Find a Grave Friday tomorrow morning. And until then, I'm going to go get some rest. And all of you, stay safe, stay strong. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, stay spooky. Have a great day.